program assistant for the Immigration and Refugee Policy Program. And I'm also very excited to be working at FCNL on immigration. In my group of friends, I've always been known as the person with the big feelings. It's true. Most of my friends say that this is a compliment, but I have to believe them. For example, when I was 5 years old, in my kindergarten class, we were doing a reenactment of the Mexican Independence Day. So our teacher decided to divide the class in front of all the kindergarten classes between the Spanish and the Mexican side. Contentious, yes. She later told my mom that I had to dress up accordingly for the reenactment. When the day of the reenactment came, not only did I show up in traditional Mexican clothes, but then I also proceeded to cross my arms until my teacher decided to place me in the right side. And even though I was young, that's because I knew that all of us have the responsibility to stand up for what is just. Even as a young person, I realized that it's important to base our actions on stories that are real. When I was asked to do this speech, to think about a moment or moments that make me want to work toward a just immigration system, I did struggle because I thought about 100 events at least that inspired me. But when I thought about it a little longer, I truly thought that it comes down to actually two values: families and stories. In a weird way, immigration has always been part of my story. For example, I was born in 1994, the year that the North American Free Trade Agreement was signed. And I know this because I've heard stories from my family talking about how families went from being able to buy a cart full of groceries to not being able to afford a basic basket of food with the same amount a day from one day to another. This sadly happened to Central America. Sometimes we need to remind ourselves that we make it very hard for people not to leave their home countries to protect their families. These stories are often glossed over when we talk about undocumented immigrants in the United States. And to be honest, this understanding is largely missing from the halls of Congress. I will say, I realize that when it comes to immigration, things are complicated, and coming up with solutions is definitely not easy. I often hear about complex issues, and sometimes it's easy to get lost in twisted arguments. But I come back to those two values that guide me: families and stories. A couple years ago, I watched a documentary called Diane Crystal, and it recounted the story of a man who had perished from Central America to get to the United States. When they found his body, they found in his chest the words Diane Crystal. Throughout the movie, they try to find who is this man and who is Diane Crystal. It is later found that it is his daughter. But it doesn't surprise me that this man thought that this sacrifice was worth to protect his family. The movie then offered a prayer which I would like to share with you. Give me 1 second. The journey towards you, Lord, is life. To set off is to die a little. To arrive is never to arrive until one is at rest with you. You, Lord, experienced migration. You brought it upon all men who know what it is to live, who seek safe passage to the gates of heaven. You drove Abraham from his land, father of all believers. You shall remember the paths leading to you, the prophets and the apostles. You yourself became a migrant from heaven to earth. Every time I become absorbed by the complexities, I come back to this story. This documentary, along with many stories that I know, show me that when people immigrate, they risk the journey because of their families. So I always come back to this story to guide my work in immigration. We often castigate people for immigrating, but this prayer reminds us that there is that of God in the immigrant, that Jesus himself represented the immigrant and the persecuted, and that reminds us of the humanity of immigration. When I first heard of the concept, that of God in every person, working here at FCNL, it brought me so much comfort. I never thought first that I'd be working to influence federal legislation and that I would get to meet with decision makers. But FCNL has given me that opportunity. And we are moving to advocate policies that are advocating for, we're moving to advocate for legislation that is rooted in justice, in love, and dignity. Our lives will be forever marked by the current immigration system. And although it might be silly to say, but just like when I was in kindergarten, this time we can't afford to be on the wrong side, even when we're told by our so-called teachers and leaders. Working at an organization that upholds the same values that I do, it is not only encouraging, but it gives me a sense that we're moving towards justice together. If my kindergarten self saw myself right now, I think she would be pretty proud to see me on the right side. Thank you for having me.